Yes. Can you hear me?
Can you hear us okay?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes. Which school is that?
Good morning.
Morning.
We're running a little late due to technical difficulties, but we're glad you're here. Morris, do you have anything you want to tell us? Hello, Morris. Come in, Morris. You have any announcements, Marge, or anything you want to share with us? Good to have you back, by the way.
Oh, well, thank you. I wasn't backsliding last week. We went to, Mike Shepherd sang in this men's group over at Cedar. And we went to a small Adventist church for the chorus to sing. It was wonderful. It was wonderful. I don't have any announcements.
I appreciate the email going out, for Odell Dolinski. I don't know how she's doing, but we hope her surgery went well. Haven't heard otherwise, so maybe that's a good sign.
It's on the 30th.
What?
Surgery. See them.
On the 30th? Oh, it hasn't happened.
Soon, folks. So we're running behind, but we're missing a camera guy this morning, but John has saved the day.
I think they kind of.
And we're through it, and we're running behind, so I don't have anything else to add. So Lloyd, why don't you have our prayer? Okay.
Give praise and thanksgiving for all of your loving kindness. We ask that we be given the grace to worship in spirit and truth. We ask, O Lord, that you be with us and guide us and show us your ways, not the ways of this world. You see, in Ananias and Sapphira. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
John, go ahead, Doug. Sorry, we're late.
Good morning, everyone. I've got a request, and if it's not easy or possible, then I understand, but it would be possible to turn the camera view so that I can see people's faces instead of their backs. Oh, that's perfect. Thank you. Good to see all of you. How is the volume? I do have my earbuds and microphone here, and if that would help, I will use that. But is the volume okay?
Yeah, volume's fine.
Hearing me good. Okay. Well, really good to see all of you. And in a couple of weeks, I will see you in person. I'll be there the first and second Sabbath of September, and looking forward to that. That's always a good time to see you in person. I am currently sitting in our daylight basement. We have a home on the lake, and our daylight basement opens up with a sliding glass door just off here to my left. I'm looking out at the lake right now. And in this daylight basement, we have 2 guest bedrooms, a bathroom, a little sitting area where I am, a little kitchenette, our laundry room, and off the laundry room is a mechanical room. And because this has been a family home, Lorraine's mother built it, and then we bought it from her. Because this has been in the family for a long time, it has been a gathering place for years for family. And a couple of weeks ago, our niece and her family were scheduled to come and spend a week of their vacation on the lake. And as they were arriving, literally as they pulled in and were getting their stuff unpacked, Lorraine, who was, I think, getting some stuff out of the dryer, said, "Oh, Douglas, come down and take a look here." She said, "I think I've discovered where this leak is coming from." Well, those are wonderful words to hear when people arriving and going to spend a week of their vacation in a basement that is likely to be flooded. The longer story is that in the mechanical room, we had some seepage that was coming in under the outside wall. Kind of, it looked like it was maybe coming down the foundation and then leaking under for months. And we kept trying to track it. Now we figured it was probably coming from the front yard where we were watering our lawn, or from our pond out front that maybe had some sort of a drainage issue. And it wasn't too bad. It was a little bit of leakage along the wall And so we kept tracking it down and changing things outside, and then it would go away. We said, okay, we've solved it. But little did we know the leak was not coming from outside. It was actually coming worse from somewhere upstairs and coming down the wall and leaking onto the floor. Well, the day to discover it was as our niece and her family were arriving. And there we could see clearly behind the freezer, our freezer's in the laundry room, that the whole wall behind the freezer was completely soggy and wet and starting to slough off and black with mold. And you discover something like that. Have any of you discovered something like that in your home? Have you faced an issue where you just say, oh, I've got to deal with this? Oh, so we said, okay. So I went into the mechanical room and I immediately took down, well, first I had to empty all of the shelves of our cleaning supplies and tools and stuff that were on the shelves directly behind this area that was so leaky and soggy. And so I took all the stuff, boxed it up, took that out to the garage, took all the shelves off the wall, then started tearing the wall apart, took off all this soggy insulation. I mean, it just, and meanwhile, our niece and her family, two little girls, are bringing their stuff in and they're getting ready for vacation. And I'm creating this huge mess and dumping wet, soggy insulation out in the backyard and telling the girls, don't touch that stuff. It'll make you itchy. You know, great way for them to arrive for their vacation. So long story short, I finally got the freezer out from the wall, everything torn apart, exposed, and could see that up there in the darkness somewhere, this leak was coming from down above and had been doing so for months. And that what we thought was coming from the foundation wall and under the house from outside was actually coming from some pipe up there that was leaking. And it had been leaking so long that it had just completely soaked the whole wall, the insulation, everything was black with mold and soggy. And so I pulled the freezer out and began ripping out more drywall, insulation, creating this huge mess. And again, long story short, we got it all ripped out, could find the leak. Our neighbor, who's a plumber, came down. Fortunately, it was within reach. He got it fixed. And now we have a big fan on it that's drying it all out. And within a couple of weeks, probably it'll be time for me to now get it all put back together. Okay, why do I tell you that story? At that moment, my inclination was to say, let's just close the door of the laundry room and ignore this thing. I don't know if you've ever had an inclination like that when something very disagreeable and difficult shows up. Let's just close the door on it and see if everything will be okay. Well, most things that are disagreeable and difficult don't get any better by just closing the door on them. Today, we have a difficult and somewhat disagreeable passage to study. How many of you at least took a look at it or maybe even read it and reflected on it this week? Can I see your hands? Okay, so some of you know that we are in for a difficult and somewhat disagreeable passage to look at. And there are a handful of these. In fact, there's several handfuls of these in Scripture. And when we come across them, sometimes we want to say, oh, it's easier to just close the door on this and ignore it and pretend it doesn't exist. And maybe that will work for a while, but at some point, it's not going to work. We have to face it. And when some people face these difficult and disagreeable passages, it can sometimes really undo their faith. It can turn them I have heard people say the reason I am no longer a believer is, and they will cite some of these disagreeable and difficult passages. I have heard people get very cynical who are not believers and say, how in the world can you believe in a book, in a God who looks like this, who has this kind of stuff going on? That just makes no sense. And so it's sometimes used as the reason that some people don't pay attention and don't take the Bible seriously, who choose not to love God. And so for a variety of reasons, it's probably worthwhile for us to take a look. I'll have to admit, I was not intending to include Sapphira as part of our August series on women. It was Ken's idea. So thank you, Ken. And when we were putting this together, Ken said, how about if we include Ananias and Sapphira? And I said, oh, Ken. I said, that's a difficult passage. And I was wanting to just kind of close the door on the big leaky mechanical room and say, let's not. And he said, okay, Doug, whatever you say. A week or so later, I was thinking and praying about it, and I texted him back. I said, okay, Ken, let's include Sapphira. So we've included Sapphira, and she is very different. You know, we started off with Priscilla, and then we went to Eunice and Lois. And last week we had Lydia, which, by the way, John, thank you for your lesson on Lydia last week. And next week we have Jochebed. So we have these admirable characters in our August study of women. And we can admire them and respect them and say, wow, they inspire us to become more like Jesus and to grow closer to God. Why drop Sapphira into this mix? Why would we want to include her? Well, I have a friend and colleague, well, he's no longer living, but former colleague and friend at Southern, Don Leatherman. Some of you may recognize that name. Don and I shared an office space for years and enjoyed chatting. And I always enjoyed Don's clever and pithy ways of summarizing much of life. And he said one time, no life is ever wasted. And the finish to the statement was, at least you can be a bad example. Okay, so maybe that's why we're studying Sapphira. At least she can be a bad example to us. And that's worth spending some time thinking about. But then there's this other issue. As you read the story, you say, all these stories ultimately are about God. And God shows up in this story looking, fierce, rash, cruel. How do we understand who God is if this is ultimately a story that tells us about God and who God is and what God is like and how God interacts with his people? Then what does this say about God? And so we're going to have two areas of focus. We're going to divide our time between, I don't know why balloons just went up in front of my face. It was emphasizing a certain point here. We're going to have two areas of focus. One of them is, are those balloons coming up on your screen too? Somebody's having fun. It's to lighten the mood, I think, that we're going to have two areas of focus. One of them will be, is there a cautionary tale? What is it about Sapphira's life that is a bad example for us to avoid? And we're going to pay some attention to that, because that's at least something that we should look at. And then the other half of the time we'll use this way and we'll say, so who is God in this story? What does it say about God? And we're going to divide our time, I hope, equally between those two things. And that's our goal for today, is to look at those two things. Now, let me give you a disclaimer to begin with. I don't have all the answers. I don't have this all figured out. I think I have some ideas. I hope they can be helpful. And I will also say that as a class, we always come up with good stuff. And I always learn as I listen to you. But I don't think as a class we're going to come up with all the answers to this. So the disclaimer is, I don't think that we will end this class completely at ease and clear on everything that is difficult and disagreeable about this passage. I don't think we will. But I think we'll make some progress in that direction. And actually, I think that's a good thing. And let me tell you why. I don't believe that God designed Scripture to all be understood at the first pass, or even the second or third. I think that God designed Scripture to challenge us, because it's dealing with really big and important stuff. And it's a lifetime process during which we keep reflecting and thinking and growing. And we come to some of these difficult, or maybe even some of these amazing passages that are awe-inspiring, and we get a little bit out of them. We understand a little bit, but we come back to it. And we get a little bit more later. And then we learn and we grow and we talk with others. We experience more in life, and we come back to it again. And we get a little bit more. And we understand where it's a constantly growing process. And I don't think he designed Scripture for us to just say, okay, I've got that now. And we get it all in the first pass. It's something that is a lifelong process that we keep studying, thinking, reflecting on, and growing from. And so today, if you've never studied the story of Sapphira before, this might be kind of a first pass. And if you've studied it many times, this may be a 10th pass or a 20th pass for you. And I'm hoping it will deepen a little bit and say, who is God? What does this tell us about who God is? And what does this caution me away from? I hope that wherever you are in your process, that we'll go just a little bit deeper in one of those ways. So that's where we're going today. And I'm just looking at my notes here to see if I missed. Oh yeah, I wanted to give you some ground rules and some basic guidelines that will help us, and then we'll jump in. And even though we're getting started a little bit later, I thought it was important to give you this background before we actually jumped into this difficult passage. And here's some basic ground rules and guidelines to help us. And that is, I think that it's important when we approach Scripture, period, but especially when we discuss some of these difficult and disagreeable passages, that we have some humility and we don't assume that we know it all. And we come with a humble, teachable attitude and we say, I have a lot to learn. And we also come with patience and say, okay, I'm not going to demand that I understand everything right now. And that we have patience and humility to come at a passage like this and say, I'd like to learn more today. I'd like God to teach me. I'd like to listen to one another. And I'm willing to not have this all settled right now. I'm willing to keep going and keep understanding this as time goes by, as God gives me clearer ideas of who he is and what Scripture is saying. So that's one thing, humility and patience. A second thing is, I think it's always important that we work from the known to the unknown. What do I know for sure? For example, I would hope that most of you in this room know for sure that God is love, and that that's something you know. And that when you see something in the Bible that seems to say God is not love, you'll say, that's unknown. How do I figure that out? But I'm going to work from the known to the unknown. I know God is love. And so this story that seems to say something different has to be fitted into what I know for sure, instead of saying, okay, I'm making this story the way that I interpret everything else. I'm going to use the known that God is love to interpret what is unknown, a story that's difficult like Sapphira. Does that make sense? So working from the known to the unknown. A third principle is Jesus is the ultimate revelation of God. And when we are troubled by difficult passages, we always need to come back to Jesus. And we need to say, who is Jesus? Because Jesus is the ultimate revelation of who God is. And we look at Jesus and we see how Jesus treated people. We see how Jesus interacted with people. And we say, Jesus is the ultimate revelation of God. And so I have to interpret everything in the light of who Jesus is. And then fourthly and lastly, the ultimate revelation of who Jesus is on the cross. When on the cross, Jesus says about his enemies, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. When he turns to the man dying next to him, who says, hey, would you include me in what's going on? I don't know much about it, but I'd like to be a part of whatever you have going. And Jesus says, yes, you're in. When we see Jesus laying down his life, he says, nobody takes my life from me. I lay it down voluntarily. But what we see about Jesus on the cross, his self-sacrificing, giving of himself, loving his enemies, drawing people in, that's the ultimate picture of who Jesus is. And so with these four guidelines in mind, and that is humility and patience, and work from the known to the unknown, and Jesus is the ultimate revelation of God, and the cross is the ultimate revelation of Jesus. With those in mind, then let's come to a difficult passage and say, how do we understand it using these guidelines? With that, I think we are ready to jump into Acts chapter 5 and divide our time. So open your Bibles to Acts 5, the story of Sapphira, and divide our time between, first, what is the cautionary tale here? What do we see about life from a rotten perspective that we need to avoid? And is there a lesson there for us? And then secondly, who's God? What does it say about God? So let's focus on them in that order. And if you make a comment about the second one, while we're still discussing the first one, I may just ask you to hold that until we get to that, because I'd like to divide our time roughly between those two. So here we are, Acts chapter 5 and verse 1. Now a man named Ananias, together with his wife Sapphira, also sold a piece of property. Now that word also is referencing us back to the chapter above, which we'll look at in a minute. Barnabas is introduced to us, who's going to become kind of a key figure in the rest of the story of the book of Acts. And he'd sold a piece of property too. We'll come back to that in a minute, but that's what the also is about. Now, a man named Ananias, together with his wife Sapphira, also sold a piece of property. With his wife's full knowledge, he kept back part of the money for himself, but brought the rest and put it at the apostles' feet. Then Peter said, Ananias, how is it that Satan has so filled your heart that you have lied to the Holy Spirit and have kept for yourself some of the money you received for the land? Didn't it belong to you before it was sold? And after it was sold, wasn't the money at your disposal? What made you think of doing such a thing? You have not lied to men, but to God. When Ananias heard this, he fell down and died. And great fear seized all who heard what had happened. Then the young men came forward, wrapped up his body, and carried him out and buried him. About 3 hours later, his wife came in, not knowing what had happened. Peter asked her, tell me, is this the price you and Ananias got for the land? Yes, she said, that is the price. Peter said to her, how could you agree to test the Spirit of the Lord? Look, the feet of the men who buried your husband are at the door, and they will carry you out also. At that moment, she fell down at his feet and died. Then the young men came in and finding her dead, carried her out and buried her beside her husband. Great fear seized the whole church and all who heard about these events. So there's the story. And just looking at Sapphira as a cautionary tale, we'll include her husband. But looking at Sapphira, the question I want to ask is, what was Sapphira's sin? And I think I heard somebody starting to comment. Please, I'm opening this up. What was Sapphira's sin? Yes, ma'am.
It's kind of vague. You have to kind of presume some of the background.
Yeah.
Obviously, they were lying about what the actual sale price was and the actual money that they were donating. But you have to kind of wonder, did they promise that they would sell X amount of land to get X amount of dollars, and they were
Yeah.
good people to build up their ego and their reputation and their people trust in them, that they would do such a grandiose, generous, sacrificial thing when they were just doing it for the facade purposes and not for.
Yeah.
And I don't know how Peter knew, maybe, obviously you have to do a lot of presuming.
Yeah. It's a bare bones story in some ways. Yeah. Yeah.
He knew how much the land sold for when they offered a different price to donate, that they caught it. So there's that. So that was basically their sin. But then you have to think, gosh, I know there's pedophiles and rapists and murderers, and God doesn't give them the death penalty. But was it more like Uzzah when he touched the ark when he was instructed not to?
Yeah.
Maybe they had a coronary.
Yeah.
The Spirit just pierced their heart with such guilt that that's what happened, but
No.
that's all speculation.
Yeah, thank you. And you're right. There's bare bones here, a lot we don't know. And so we do a little bit of speculating. But I think the essence of what you said is that they appear to be doing something here for a facade. They want people to think that they are more generous than they are. And that would be part of this. Thank you. Somebody else. What is Sapphira's sin? Yes.
Could it be that, again, we don't know a lot, but that maybe this was a repeat? It wasn't just a one and done. They had done, maybe they hadn't been doing right for a long time, and God had just said, okay, I give you a lot of mercy, I'm calling you.
That's a good thought. And there actually is a little bit of evidence to support that. Look at verse, let's see, it's verse 3. Then Peter said, Ananias, how is it that Satan has so filled your heart? Now just stop and ponder that phrase for a second. Satan has so filled your heart. That would seem to give evidence to what you're saying here. This was not just a one-off. It seems like here's somebody whose whole heart had been over a long period of time filled, not with Jesus, but with Satan. So that would maybe give some sort of evidence to what you're saying there. Thank you. Somebody else, please. Yes.
The sin in heaven was covetousness.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be somebody, something.
Mm-hmm.
That was the sin, that big lie in the Garden of Eden, being someone that we're not.
Mm-hmm.
And so at this point with Ananias and Sapphira, they were coveting in their hearts. To ask what is Sapphira's sin? To conceal
Yep.
truth,
Yep.
nature of the sin.
I don't want to get too metaphorical here, but you've actually brought my opening illustration to my mind, and that is for months, we had black mold growing behind our freezer and didn't know it. And it was growing there for a long time. It was covered up by a facade, but it was rotting out. And maybe for a long time, Ananias, presumably Sapphira, had stuff that was very ugly growing. And this was only when it came out and was visible. And I don't know if you were thinking that, but that was what brought to my mind, Marlene. Roy, I think you had your hand up.
Yes, I was going to talk about what it means to be under God's protection,
Okay.
or to come under his protection when we choose him. And what does that protection mean? Doesn't mean we're not going to have struggles or problems or issues and things like this, but it means that we can have the victory on God is what it really means. In chapter 4, gives us the idea that the practice in the church at this time was to give to the church so it could be established. And each one had made that kind of commitment. And the commitment that I think they made was known before they sold the property.
Yeah. Roy, you bring up a good point. And if it would be okay, let's go back and read that part of chapter 4. I think it would be helpful for us to look at that. And the chapter break here, like so many places in scripture, is really unfortunate because the story starts back into chapter 4 in verse 32. And the chapter break is really unfortunate. So let's go back to 32 of chapter 4. All the believers were one in heart and mind. Now, I want to just pause here. I'm going to make a few comments as we go here. This is an amazing picture that is a lot like what we see in chapter 2. In fact, let's turn back to chapter 2 for just a minute. Chapter 2, the very end, starting at verse 42, is the summary statement after the day of Pentecost. So on the day of Pentecost, we have thousands of people being baptized, joining together, and the birth of the church. And it's an amazing picture. All of the work that Jesus had been doing now comes to fruition, and the apostles are getting to see the blossoming of all Jesus' efforts. And people are forming together in little clusters of believers all over Jerusalem. And look at how it describes it here in chapter 2, right after the day of Pentecost. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe, and many wonders and miraculous signs were done by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common, selling their possessions and goods they gave to anyone as he had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. This story, Acts chapter 2, is 6 weeks after the death and resurrection of Jesus. So within weeks of Jerusalem crying out, crucify him, which, by the way, in Peter's sermon that you read earlier in chapter 2, he refers to. And he says, you were there. You were part of that mob. You saw this. Within weeks of the crucifixion, all of Jerusalem has this amazing picture of what it means for a group of people to be completely transformed by the love and grace of Jesus. And they're doing these amazing things, the miraculous things, but maybe even more miraculous than that. They're caring for one another in a way that people don't usually care for each other. They're putting their property, their physical goods, their money, their possessions, their homes at the use of those who had less. And we know that at this time, there were some shortages, there were famines, there were poor people, and they were making sure that people were well cared for. And that this was an amazing demonstration of who Jesus was. And Jerusalem was seeing Jesus now in his body. He calls the church his body. And here in these thousands of people that are scattered around Jerusalem and its environs in these tiny little clusters, they're saying, wow, we thought Jesus was amazing. Now look at his followers. This is something real. This is powerful. And every day new people were becoming a part of the congregations. I mean, this is big stuff. And unless we understand what was going on, the story of Sapphira doesn't make as much sense. So thank you for bringing us to that, Roy. Now let's go to chapter 4. We are months later here, possibly even a year or two later, but this is still what's going on in Jerusalem. Right now, the message about Jesus has not spread too far beyond Jerusalem, little ways, like up to Samaria and so forth, but it's centered in Jerusalem. And here we have now another picture, chapter 4, verse 32. All the believers were one in heart and mind. So this beautiful expression of who God is, who Jesus was, is continuing. And all the believers were one in heart and mind. No one claimed that any of his possessions was his own, but they shared all they had. With great power, the apostles continued to testify to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and much grace was upon them all. There was no needy person among them, for from time to time, those who owned lands or houses sold them, brought the money from the sales, and put it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to anyone as he had need. Now notice that there's two different things here going on. One of them is that on a daily basis, they seem to be sharing. People would say, why don't you come over to my house and eat? People were saying, looks like so-and-so down the street doesn't have as much to eat. Let's take them some food. This was going on a day-to-day basis. People were sharing and making sure that everybody in the family had what they needed. And then when there were extreme needs, maybe somebody lost their house or lost their job, somebody said, well, you know, I've got a piece of property, I've got a house, I've got something that I really don't need, let me help out. And so then they would do something that was bigger. From time to time, verse 34, from time to time, those who owned lands or houses sold them, brought the money from the sales and put it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to anyone as he had need. So there were two different things going on. There was the day-to-day caring for one another, and then there was these special times when there would be big inflow of money from a sale of something, and it would really help over a big hump. So then we have the story of Barnabas, verse 36. Joseph, a Levite from Cyprus, whom the apostle called Barnabas, which means son of encouragement, sold a field he owned and brought the money and put it at the apostles' feet. By the way, it looks from the picture that I see on the back screen that I have frozen. Is that true, that my picture is frozen?
You're okay.
But you can still hear me, right?
Oh, yeah.
Actually, you've frozen too. All of you are sitting very, very still. It means that if you raise your hand, I won't see you because my picture is frozen, you've frozen, I've frozen. Ken, you have been standing in that same position at the back of the room, very still for a long time. That's kind of what, and then I thought, oh, everybody's frozen. So anyway, if I can hear you, that's great if you can hear me, but I won't see you raise your hand because everything is frozen. So we have the story of Barnabas. Joseph, a Levite from Cyprus, whom the apostles called Barnabas, which means son of encouragement, sold a field he owned and brought the money and put it at the apostles' feet. And that's just our little introduction to Barnabas. And like I said, he's going to become quite an important character in the rest of the book, but this is our introduction to him. And apparently from this introduction, his way of becoming known in the family of God was through a very big act of generosity. Then we have the story of Sapphira. Verse 1 of chapter 5. Now a man named Ananias, together with his wife Sapphira, also sold a piece of property. With his wife's full knowledge, he kept back part of the money for himself, but brought the rest and put it at the apostles' feet. So that's the tie-in to the story that comes before. Having seen a little bit more of the background, let me ask the same question again. What was Sapphira's sin? And remember, I can't see your hand, so you're just going to need to speak up.
It strikes me, Doug, that it's two things. It's duplicity and it's also complicity. So she was complicit with her husband in this deceit. And she was duplicitous in the sense that maybe they wanted to look like Barnabas. Maybe they wanted to be part of that movement that was so intoxicating.
Yeah.
But at the same time, her loyalty was not to God.
Yeah.
Her husband.
Yeah.
And so it was this conspiracy. Hey, we can do this. We'll get some social equity, out of this. But we need to hang on to a bit. So it was that they hadn't left everything. They were holding back, and they had done it together in order to look good.
Yeah. Wow. That's powerful. And Stanley, I think that was you talking, right?
Was,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Stanley, thank you. I think that's, by the way, it's back. So you can see me moving. I can see you now. Please, another thought.
When Dennis told his wife what he had an opportunity to say, that's not right. Didn't,
Yeah. Sapphira did have a chance, didn't she? That Peter's giving her an opportunity to say, wait a minute. And she doesn't. Okay. Any others? We're about ready to switch gears here, but I'm going to do some summary. Yes, please.
That again is speculation. I agree that she could have said that to Peter. However, women were told to be very submissive to their spouses, and she may
Yeah.
very well have brought it up with him. He may have even brought it up most vehemently, but he subdued her and he was going to have his way. She had to be obedient, and so she had agreed,
Yep.
given her word that she would go with what he told her to do, and so she did. So that's up in the air too. We don't know for
Thank
sure.
you. Yeah, no, you're right. There's a lot here we don't understand. Yes, please.
Kind of reminds me of in the Garden of Eden when Eve was making a mistake and Adam didn't correct her. And here we have the reverse role of the husband making an error.
Ah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. I think I saw a couple of other hands. Please. Yes.
I think that's a great point. I think I can speak for me that sometimes I can get tugged into doing the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I can get tugged into spinning it and rationalizing it. So in my mind, I'm right, and I'm not.
Yeah.
I think at those times, it's so important to have people around me that look at you and say, that's not right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you shake your head, slap yourself in the face, and you say, you're right, not
Yeah.
right. And you
Yeah.
get back in your lane.
Yeah.
Because everybody's done this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've done it, make us perceive something to you that I'm really not because I want to elevate myself. That has nothing to do with the humility that you talked about at the beginning that we have to try to place ourselves in. It
Yeah.
is the opposite. I
Yeah.
just need a family, a community around me, and I think so do you, to be
Yeah.
helped.
Oh, John, thank you. And Marge is pointing to somebody. Oh, yes.
Wayne.
I think that's Dwayne back there. Yeah.
Make a comment about what my study Bible has about it. It says they had a right to keep back whatever they chose, but to make it appear that they had given all when they had not was the sin. So it's the deception
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
brought about, not the fact that they didn't give it all. They-
Yeah. Yeah. And Dwayne, thank you. That's a really important distinction. And I see that somebody online added a comment in the chat saying deceit, which is what you're saying. And I think that's really important. I think there were a couple of other hands. Yes, I see 3 hands. Let's take them all. Keep your comments brief because I want to hear from all of you, but I want to also make sure that we switch to the second topic too. Please, front row, or not front row, but front row, nobody in front of you.
I was just gonna say, I think they were in cahoots, because it says in verse 2, she was privy to the decision of her husband. And I think that it's 2 issues of, like she said, covetousness and that was broken there, and theft, stealing from God. Like
Yep.
holding back what they were supposedly giving to God.
Yeah, thank you. And I see 2 or 3 more hands over here on this side of them, please. Roy, why don't you go and then we'll just work our way back.
I'm coming back to the issue of protection from God. Becoming a child of God means he's under your protection. You're under his protection. But that protection is for us to remove self from our thinking and so forth. And this is an idea that if I can keep some of what I have done, as an example, then I'm okay because I'm giving. And yet God wants us to give all. And when he blesses us, because he does as his children, we need to be willing to share that blessing as much as is required by those that surround us.
Okay. Thank you, Roy. And let's work our way back. I think there's 2 hands behind you. Yes. 3 hands behind you.
So
Go
when we
ahead.
make a commitment to God, we need to keep that. And I
Okay.
had an experience with that just reminded me, a couple of weeks ago of a friend. Son, just now enrolling in college. Holy Spirit said, Diane, you need to send some money to help her pay his tuition. There was a specific number that God kept telling me that was what I needed to say.
Wow.
But then last week I had a major car repair that I hadn't expected. And it was the same amount of what the Holy Spirit said to send. So when I was dealing with that, I kept thinking, I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I can do it. And the Holy Spirit just kept at me. Yes, you can still do it because I'm taking care of your finances. So I put it in the mail today on my way to church.
Wow. And this story is to be continued.
Well, yes, it is, but
Yes.
I have to trust God. I made a promise and I have to keep my promise.
Thank you. I want to hear from anybody else who had their hand up, and then we are going to switch gears. I think clear back, John.
One of the things about this story seems to typically bother us is that idea of proportionality. Let the punishment fit the crime. And it leads me back to the story of Uzzah. And good intention, he reaches out, touches the ark, and is struck dead. And then Adam and Eve are mentioned. They ate an apple. All of death comes because they ate an apple. Okay, that's our perspective on this thing. But then we have to turn it around and say, okay, what are the consequences of these actions? And what, from God's perspective, why is this important? Rather than from our perspective, and does the punishment fit the crime?
That's a really good point, and I wish we had time to explore it. As we move into our second section here in a moment, I think we may touch on that a bit, but that's an excellent point. Did I miss anybody else's hand who was up? I'll take that. Rob.
Well, my comment's right on the heels of John's. If we all look back, I'm gonna speak for myself, but it's probably applicable. But if we look back over our lives, our spiritual journey has been just that. It's been a growth process.
Yep.
I have made those same decisions, those same things in the past. Did I get a death sentence for that? Nope. So what I'm struggling with is why this constituted a death sentence.
Yep.
Because they're no more guilty than I am. What's the difference?
Yep. And Rob, I think you've hit the heart of it there, that we read this story and we say, how is this just? How is this death sentence? And what does that mean for me? That if I go to church now in a few minutes and the offering is passed, I pull out my wallet and I see there a 20 and 2 10s and a 5, and I pull out the 5 and drop it in the offering instead of the 20 or all of it, is God going to strike me dead? What is the takeaway from the story? And why is it there? And we're going to switch to that in just a moment. And again, I will not claim that we'll answer all the questions. I hope that we'll give a little bit of, we'll move the ball down the field a little bit. Anybody else who had their hand up? Did I miss anybody who had their hand up already?
Right here.
Please,
Yeah.
please.
Bible says they lied to the Holy Spirit. That to me is like saying they've made their final choice. Perhaps, I don't know that for sure, but God knows. And I have to trust that God knows the difference. And perhaps it was an example to others because others knew there was a difference. We don't know that for sure. But we have to trust that, like with Uzzah, God knew the heart. Have to trust he knows everybody's heart.
Yeah, thank you. And boy, we'll take one more comment and then I'm going to summarize. This is our last comment.
I'll keep it short. Maybe it wasn't so much about the deceit and everything as much as I could see their hearts, that this whole process of the selling of stuff to them was all about glorifying and exalting themselves and their image, and it was all about them realizing and exalting themselves to be praised instead of God being praised. Maybe God in his foresight understood what kind of damage they were going to do in the future in defeating his purpose of the gospel going forward. We also don't know if it was more that their hearts were pounding when they went in there because the Holy Spirit was convicting them that what they were doing was wrong. They should just admit, kept some, but their ego and their image was more important than God and honesty. So maybe they just had a heart attack. We don't know how, we don't know if necessarily God killed them.
Yeah.
Or they just, for some other reason we don't know, just died. So done. Say that was quick.
Good comments. And I'm actually going to use that as the transition. That I think that's all very possible. And let me point out a couple of observations that might be helpful here. I think one of them is that context of what was going on in this amazing community of faith. And this was the very beginning of this huge movement. And looking back historically over the last couple thousand years, we realize that greed and pretension and falsifying motives and hiding behind the religiosity, but really having some very evil motives, that has plagued the church off and on for its entire history. And here seems to be a very early example of that, where this beautiful thing that's going on in Jerusalem is being attacked from the inside, so that people want to put up a false front and do something that is really very self-serving, but do it in the name of religion and get credit and honor and acknowledgement and applause for something that they do under the guise of religion. And it seems as though the other part that is quite helpful here is that statement where Peter says, Satan has so filled your heart that, if I were to go back to my opening illustration, that one little drip of water in our house is not likely to cause a big problem. But when it dripped and dripped and dripped, and over months completely rotted out and created black mold along the whole wall behind our freezer, that was a big problem. And I've had to tear out a lot of stuff, and it's still not fixed. And God was, I believe, saying, there's something here you don't see. Satan has so filled your heart, and this is a rot. This is black mold within this beautiful thing that's growing within Jerusalem. And I do need to deal with it. And again, I don't know that that's what God was saying. I'm saying that's possibly what we see in Peter's comment. Satan has so filled your heart. Those ideas may be helpful. If we were going to apply it to ourselves, wow. And then we do need to switch gears here. If we were to apply it to ourselves, we say, how is it that I want people to think of me? And how important is it? Yes, it's nice to have people think good things about us. But when I know that my thoughts are bitter, hateful, cruel, vindictive, when I am harboring such hatred or other bitterness within myself and not willing to deal with it, but instead wanting to just put a front on it, how dangerous is that? To allow such rot to grow inside of me, but be more concerned that I keep the outside looking nice so that people will still think nice things about me, instead of allowing God to deal with what's really going on inside of me. That's a lesson for me. That's something that I view as a takeaway from Sapphira's sin, from Ananias' sin, and say, God, deal with the inside. I am so prone to just want to take care of the outside so that people will think nice things about me, but deal with what's going on inside of me. That's for me a cautionary tale here. Now okay, Stanley, I think this is the last comment on our first section here, please.
It seems to me the heart of gospel is that if anything is more important to you, whether it's family or things or stuff, it's an idol. It becomes idolatry. And it puts myself in the place of God, instead of putting God in the place of me.
Yeah.
And it controls me rather than me being controlled by the Holy Spirit.
Well put. Thank you. Well, we have 3 minutes. We have 3 minutes for our last half. And let me ask the question. So who's God in this story? Do you like this God? Please.
The fact of the matter is, somebody brought it up here. We've all done that, and we all deserve to drop dead. Now, God, going back to chapter 4, you know that this is just an illustration in a bigger story. What happened to Ananias and Sapphira was an example of what we deserve. And the thing of God is, we've all done it, and none of us have been dropped dead. There's the loving God.
Okay.
You've been given an opportunity to say, I don't want to live like that. And there's nothing more malignant than something that is 99% fine, only 2% or 1% malignant. That one drop of water that started it up from that leak was the problem. That was as big a problem as what it ended up being. And the loving God is that I have not been struck dead when I've done it.
Thank you. I've got time for 1 or 2 more. Who's God in this story? Do you like him? Are you afraid?
Question, a comment on this. When the Israelites came out of Egypt, they needed to know what directions, because they've been so filled with what the history, that's all they knew. At this point, we have these new Christians coming out of the pompous falseness of the religiosity at that time, and they needed clarity on where they should be going.
They had been following leaders that Jesus called whitewashed sepulchres full of rot. That's who they'd been following. Is that kind of the essence of what you're saying, Keith?
Yeah, right. So 2 Keiths.
Okay. Okay, we've got to wrap up here. Did I miss anybody's hand? I'm sorry that we didn't have longer on this, but you are coming up with some good thoughts. There's a hand that Marge is pointing to, but I don't see where it is. Please. Go ahead.
One very quick comment is, during this story, there is still a great deal of mercy on God's behalf, and we shouldn't ignore the warning signs. He did not want them to be struck dead. He gave them a blatant and very obvious confrontation and showed them where the error was. They both missed an opportunity to take that. And so God in his mercy gave them an opportunity to prevent what was coming.
Thank you. And we've got to close with that last hand that was up. There was one more hand up and I missed it. Please, we'll close with your comment.
I like him. I think you got me thinking, I think they committed the unpardonable. I think God knocked on their door one more time, and like you said, gave them ample chance, and he knows their heart. And that's it.
Well, it is half, or not half past, it's a quarter past and time to stop. I'm going to take the teacher's prerogative here and just make a couple summary statements. And that is, I wouldn't be surprised if there are a couple of people in the room who actually have such big unanswered questions that it's possible that you will walk out of the room with more uncertainty than you walked into the room. And if so, I feel badly about that. And I realize that is a danger when we study a difficult story. Please could I encourage you to keep reading, keep thinking, and come back to this idea of, what do I know for sure? I do know that God is love. I do know that God is revealed in Jesus. I do know that Jesus' revelation on the cross is the best revelation I'll ever get of God. I'm going to put this story on the shelf and others like it, and I'm going to pull it down from time to time to look at it in light of the things that I know for sure. But meanwhile, I'm not going to give up on who God is. So that's the people who might walk out of here with still some real troubled thoughts. To the rest of us, could I make this appeal? Let's live lives of internal goodness, not just external goodness. Let's be people who are full of light and not darkness inside. Let's be a part of a community that really cares about each other, honestly, and not just on the surface. Our class can be like that. We can be like that as individuals. Let's take away from this very difficult, sobering story an inspiration that the church can look different than it looks. Maybe part of the reason the church doesn't feel as good as we'd like it to feel is that we've got too much of the Ananias and Sapphira going on still, and that we really need to be light and loving from the inside out and not just plastered on the outside, hoping that people will think that we're really a lot better than we are. I'm going to leave it with that. And again, my apologies if some of you are leaving on a downer. My encouragement is to see Jesus. Ken, I'll turn it over to you.
Seldom ask question, but how many are just a little bit more comfortable with their story than they were? Let me see your hand. Did we learn anything how to get through this difficult story? Let me leave you with this. Most of you have had children. Most of you have had grandchildren. Have you noticed when the baby gets here and the mom, then it's time that everybody can come over and everybody can see the new baby. It's an infant, just like this church was an infant. But the mom says, you're all welcome, but somebody has a cold in the family. They can't come. Can't make my infant sick. Going to delay his maturity. He or the little girl or little boy might suffer. We care about you. Can't come in. I try to relate that because it's the right thing to do. It's an infant. And my other grandson, no matter how much I love him or granddaughter, to damage this little infant of the health cold. So I'm glad that you feel a little better about this story, Doug. I knew you'd pull it off. I have all the confidence in the world. You did. I know you were squirming at first, but okay. You did really, really well. Next week, Barney Miller is supposed to be here, the former Michael Jackson co-worker in Tina. He can't come. He suddenly has a conflict. I'm no Barney Miller, but I'll be leading our discussion next week. Jochebed, Moses' mother. What a woman. What a bold, bold, wonderful woman. So we will be seeing you next week. So Dr. Cosgrove, would you have our prayer, please?
Father, thank you for bringing us all here together for this story. Thank you for working through Doug to help us apply this in a meaningful way to our lives, to what we do. help us understand better what you want us to do. Not to rationalize it or benefit, or our benefit, but understand it is your work, totally for you. That we live, I hope, in a humble way. Father, help us understand this better, live our lives as the way you want us to live.
Thank you. For those that are not on our email list and would like to get the lesson every week, it'll be sent out today. If you would like to get on our email list, please see me or see Dewan, and we'll get you on it. And so you can share Doug's lesson. He writes every week.